ora Stefano.
Kia ora.
Hi everyone, welcome. A special episode in this little mini series that has evolved that I've been doing on Baby Reindeer, which is the acclaimed Netflix 7-part series. Kind of a bit harrowing at times, this series. I think a lot of you now have been with me from part 1 of this series. I'm going to link all of them below so you can catch up if you are new. And if you are new, you are so warmly welcome. My name is Gwendoline and this community is known as the Soul Food Whānau. So just so you know, whānau is the Te Reo Māori word for family, and that's the name of our community. So hi, I'm Gwendoline and I'm with my beautiful husband today, Markie.
Ooh. Hello. Thank you. I didn't know it was beautiful.
He's always taken off guard when I compliment him. He's so sweet. Hello, darling. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me on your channel.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you, darling. So, guys, I want you to, after this, if you would kindly go and check out Mark's channel and do subscribe if you can and if you want to. But the handle, Mark's handle, is on the screen right now. So have a look.
Yeah, come on over. And I'm going to do something on Baby Reindeer because I'm a stand-up comedian and a psychotherapist. So I'm going to do something from that perspective on my channel. That's
going to be so cool. So I'm actually looking forward to that. And I hope you will weave in some neurodiverse stuff as well, Markie, because...
Sure to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, because Markie's ND and I think that is also something that I don't see anyone else talking about. And I think, indeed, Donny... I don't even know if he's aware that he might be on the spectrum or he might be neurodiverse in some way, maybe ADHD or something. It's fascinating. But let's do first things first. Okay, so Markie, this is for you. Okay, Markie, so how about you introduce the theme of this video? And this has been by special request, guys, so I wanted to honour that. This aspect of the series is so intriguing and indeed has captured a lot of your imagination. So Markie, go
So
ahead.
we're going to look at the psychology and the behaviour of the character of Darien. Now, Darien's supposedly based on a real person, most likely is. And so information about the real person might start to come out. I think it probably already has, but we're not talking about the real person. We're talking about the character that's portrayed in the series.
Yeah, really important, that.
And why he does what he does, and just breaking down some of his behaviour, because it's typical of a number of things, which we'll look at as we go.
Yeah. So if you're ready, guys, you might want to get a couple for this because we're going to kind of dive quite deep. But let's start with that. So, Markie, one of the things, guys, when we were preparing for this, to make this content, I reminded Mark of Darien. I want to keep calling him Darius, but it's Darien, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay,
so Darien, one of the first things he says to Donny, if you guys remember, when... Donny's in this kind of club sort of setting. It's a bar or something, and it's this kind of fancy schmancy party, isn't it? A schmoozing party.
So it's the VIP of the Edinburgh Festival.
There you go. That's right.
The VIP bar, or
yeah. And he's got that chance invitation. I do find that so fascinating because in life, if you think about those relationships where you've crossed paths with someone that actually... Well, let's put it very politely and say it's a mixed blessing,
Right.
Often that's putting it really mildly, I think.
Curse.
A mixed curse indeed. But I think it's, sometimes you think, God, if I hadn't have gone to that party, or if I hadn't have gone to that club, if I hadn't have taken that job. But I find that interesting straight off the bat. But also what's fascinating is that Darien says to Donny, after he's kind of quite rudely rebuffed by that guy who's a writer on this acclaimed television series, he's feeling a bit dejected, and in comes Darien and says, do you want me to slip some poison in his drink? He says words to that effect. And what I wanted just to remind us all of is the wise words of Maya Angelou. I believe it's Maya Angelou who said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And I think that's a classic example of where if we don't usually have the wherewithal, the foresight when we meet someone and there is something a bit dodgy from the get-go. Often it is literally in the first thing they say to you or the first the kind of encounter you have with them, and we miss it and we ignore it. And I just wanted to remind us all of that, because often if someone says that to you in the first breath, you might be the one that eventually ends up being poisoned. So take note. Anyway,
so it's interesting because in a kind of a storytelling in storytelling language, that would be called foreshadowing.
Oh, there you go.
But in kind of things like forms of statement analysis and deception detection and that kind of thing, and in some psychological models, that would be known as leakage. Where
yes.
Something that's on your mind, not necessarily your conscious mind, more likely your unconscious mind, kind of comes out. And leakage jokes are quite a common way in which leakage comes out.
Yes.
So, what was that? Many a true word said in jest.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so funny how these things, idioms or whatever, they've got so much truth to them. And I think, sometimes people think, well, how do I help myself? How do I judge people? How do I make connections that are trustworthy and new friends or relationships? What do I do? Well, look out for these things. It doesn't mean you write someone off because they've made a joke, and that might genuinely be their dark sense of humor or whatever, but just keep it in mind, right? That's all I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you want to talk about a bit more about how they met, the actual first meeting, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's along those lines in a way of things that were kind of interesting about that the portrayal of that first encounter. What else comes to your mind?
Well,
Markie?
I thought it was, in a way, it's something that could come out of melodrama, or like it's a bit Mephistophelian, if that's the right word. So so Donny's rebuffed by somebody, and then Darien just immediately appears, and it's like poof.
Yes, like the devil. Yeah, right, exactly.
So, just at that moment, his moment of feeling the smallest, feeling the most vulnerable, and he just appears. I thought that was kind of quite interesting.
Very, very. And again, I think true to life. Sometimes that, and what Mark and I were thinking about before making this content, definitely in my view. And as I say, I don't know if there's research that's been done on this, but I think it's so fascinating that often, particularly as a therapist, I can speak on this, when I work with patients who, for example, were bullied in childhood, perhaps also abused at home in some way, at school, the kind of bullying continued. It's almost like the prior abuse kind of marks that child. It's
like you've got a victim on your head.
Yeah. And so it can carry through to adulthood, where someone who is like Darien, who's basically a predator, spots that a mile off, because that's his gift, to put it in a in a benevolent way. It's obviously a very kind of evil genius I'm talking about,
like a shark smelling blood.
Exactly. But I think therefore that kind of what Mark just described, like poof, and then suddenly this shadowy figure appears at your moment of vulnerability and feeling really small inside. I think there is, again, truth to that. And again, you can take this into your real life, because be mindful of who you are surrounded with or by when you are vulnerable. Ideally, it's people who already know you and who you love and who will, look after you and protect you. It's often portrayed in pop culture. The girls go out for a drink when one of the girls has broken up with someone, and she's cruising and she's looking for someone to get under to get over the other person. Do you know what I mean, guys? So it's like, but actually that's probably not a great idea, really, because if you've just broken up with someone, or if you've just been rebuffed like Donny was in this scene, that's not a good time to be putting yourself about, because you're too raw, you're too open, and potentially you're going to invite someone maybe who is of questionable character, right?
Yeah. Yes, I suppose carrying on that kind of devilish theme, of kind of temptation. The devil always offers you something, When I say the devil, I'm talking like in literary, in fiction and in literature and stuff.
It's a metaphor.
The devil always kind of, tempts you with something. And Donny does that Darien, two D's, I get them mixed up. Darien very much kind of offers temptation, offers the forbidden fruit, offers what Donny wants when he most needs it.
Yeah.
So it's all about grooming, isn't it? Because when I heard, there was going to be a rape theme in the story, I was expecting a violent attack And it wasn't. It was very insidious, quite long-term, planned grooming.
Yes.
And yeah, like you said, that's the word grooming we associate with people that groom children. But, people groom adults just as much. Not necessarily, not necessarily in terms of sexual abuse, but other forms of abuse. People will, and we talked a bit about love bombing as well.
Yes, yes.
These are all things that happen in cults as well.
Yes.
Cults operate in just the same way as, a lot of predators do.
Yes.
Begin with love bombing.
Yeah, absolutely. So just flattering you into oblivion, and you're like, oh my God, he's so lovely,
Yeah.
And actually, there's an agenda there. So yeah, I think that grooming and the fact that Darien had something that Donny wanted. We need to think about these things in terms of what I mentioned, I think, in part 2 of this miniseries, which is the kind of power differential. I'm using that term, borrowing it from kind of healthcare and stuff. It might not be exactly the correct term, but I think it's the most useful. What that speaks to, guys, is just the fact that they're not both on equal footing. They're not like two college kids doing the same course, peers, in other words, or colleagues in a job where they're both cashiers on the sales desk or whatever. This is someone who has got massive influence. He's written a hit TV series, and here's Donny trying to make his way in the world. And so Darien is like, well, I can tighten up your script, which he does. I can sharpen it up. He suddenly, we see in the show how, he turns the whole comedy routine around, and suddenly he's getting rapturous applause. And so it's very sophisticated, but also there's a truth to the fact that Darien literally does have something to offer him. He is gifted in what he does. He does help Donny. Those things actually happen. So it makes it even more difficult for Donny or anyone in that sort of position to differentiate that this person still may be having an agenda to harm you and to exploit, which he does, right?
And the power differential is with age as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's 55, I think.
Right.
Donny's in his 20s.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was just going to say, which kind of harks back to the previous sort of thread that we looked at, Donny is... I think we both said when we talked that Donny displays all the signs of probably having been abused before as a child.
Yeah.
And he's very messed up and very insecure, and he's got kind of, and he's desperate.
Yeah,
he's got desperation, and his comedy is terrible. But look at the energy that he puts into it. It's real high energy. He really throws himself into it. So he's and when you're desperate, that's when when you attract predators with that desperation.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability.
And Darien's got everything that he wants,
Everything.
Or says he has.
Yes, and can kind of back it up, because he does get him into those parties. He does show him, like Donny says, he shows me this other life that I could only have dreamed of, kind of thing. So I think, again, this is what makes it, because in life, generally, in my experience, when you meet someone even remotely like Darien, they can't back it up generally, or it falls short very quickly. But when they have a level of power or influence and they can back it up, I think that's far more dangerous, because then he's really he's proven, look what I can give you if you just take another step, if you just take this drug this time, you should just do,
And that leads into the topical side of things, which I think you've got on the list to talk about. I don't know if that was coming next, but with Jay-Z and Diddy, and the things that Cat Williams talked about.
Yes.
And that's the music industry, but
and the entertainment.
It's probably in a lot of other industries as well.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
But again, it's that same thing. Is you've got people. I use the word desperation, but also ambition. I suppose the thing with Donny is he's messed up, like a lot of comedians are. In fact, I think you have to be a bit messed up to be a good comedian. And it's that ambition, and that's what people prey on, I think, in the music industry and in the showbiz industry. They want to get ahead. It's a really hard industry to get ahead, and that's where the casting couch and all the other things, can come into it so easily.
Yeah, so easily. So when you have the likes of Oprah, Harvey Weinstein, these people who've got immense power, what are you going to do? Of course you're going to just bend over. Of course you're just going to do whatever they want, because they can change your life, and they have changed people's lives. But the question is, at what cost? You know, the question is that person, do they even recognize themselves afterwards?
Yeah.
You know, that's the point, really.
And metaphor-wise, again, that is selling your soul. You're selling your soul to the devil for the gift that you want.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's not even get into the fact that the occult is used far more than certainly I ever realised in those circles as well. So that adds another layer that I think will take us off track too much. But
Yeah,
that's a whole other video. Yeah, I mean, if that's something you guys are interested in, certainly Mark's got a lot of content on that sort of theme on his channel. It's not something I generally speak about myself openly, but yeah, I find that really fascinating because it adds another level of real danger, right? Because even a little bit of knowledge in the wrong hands can be a really dangerous thing with that stuff, let alone if they've figured out how to use it properly. Let's move on to another point that I think Mark made when we were discussing and planning this, which is, again, something you may encounter in your actual life. And again, it might not be at that level of, you know, exploitation we're talking about. It could be on a much more mundane level, but something to keep in mind that Mark said, which is the interchange or the kind of hot and cold aspect of Darien's flattery and then criticism, kind of reeling you in and then throwing you out, slapping you across the face and kissing you. And, you know, I mean, goodness, one of the things I touched on in my previous video was inspired by Mark, what Mark told me about the ADHD experience and that chasing, I called it chasing dopamine. And I think that's another level that would be quite seductive potentially for Donny, the push-pull, right? The slapping, now kissing. I'm using those as metaphors. I'm not saying that Darien did that. I don't know if he slapped him about or whatever, but I just mean energetically, I think that's that would be very seductive for Donny, I think.
Yeah, because it's an emotional roller coaster.
Exactly.
So ADHD is something that a lot of comedians have, and with ADHD, people can't bear boredom. They can bear crises and drama, and often attract it into their lives because it creates dopamine, even if it's terrible. So that cycle, that push pull, will be a real dopamine booster, as well as just, you know, psychologically. You know, Darien's got what he wants, and then if he so it's a kind of a tease, isn't it? It's like kind of distancing yourself. You kind of making that person more desperate. I'm thinking of the Velvet Underground song about the drug dealer. I'm waiting for my man, and it says that he's never early, he's always late. You've always got to wait. Right. So it's like drug dealers can do that as well, because they want to establish that dependency. So it's like they don't want to be too nice all the time. You know, they've got to make what they offer a bit scarce. So his approval has to be a bit scarce. That will make it more attractive and more seductive. Absolutely. Yeah, it's very sinister when you put it like that, Markie. And I think so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind if you're interested in like how to make better friendships, better connections, that where you don't miss some of the clues that will potentially help you avoid a really nasty relationship. Because, you know, things are generally not bad off the bat. People don't generally choose someone who slaps them on the first date kind of thing. But there will be signs, and I think that's a really powerful one, where you feel like, I don't know where I stand, where you feel insecure, where there's a sense of push-pull. Oh, I love you. Oh, you're rubbish. That was shit. You know, that kind of abusive. It creates an abuse cycle, and it's one that I think people should be extremely wary of. I would frankly say run if you are facing a relationship like that, and it's a friendship. And I mean, if it's your boss or something, then obviously it might not be so easy just to run. But if it's a relationship or a potential relationship, run. Don't even bother. Forget it. Whatever they're offering you, it won't be worth it, because that will only become more entrenched, that kind of pattern, and you will be far more invested and far more vulnerable down the line if you don't decide to walk away when that behaviour's first presented. And putting someone down is a big tool that's used by abusers. It's used a lot in abusive relationships. and it's a means of gaining, much stronger control. But if you've got somebody that's assertive and confident, you can't control them.
Yeah.
But if you can undermine somebody's confidence and you can make them less assertive, then you can control them. That's why in like abusive partners, they try and make out that the partner's mad, or that they're fat, or that they're ugly and nobody else would like them, they're stupid, and they isolate them as well.
Yeah.
And then they start to believe it. Mm-hmm. So it's the beginnings of that kind of process.
Exactly. So,
or potentially.
Absolutely, potentially. You don't want to find out, basically. You just don't want to find out whether it will progress in that direction. And that brings us to the next point on my list, Markie, which is Donny clearly, as you said in our conversation prior, Donny then begins to long for that approval. And even as Mark told me, I kind of missed this because there's aspects of the show that I've missed deliberately. As a psychotherapist who works with this kind of material in real life, not usually as drastic or as extreme, but the point is we're working with trauma, both Mark and myself. And for me personally, this is just the way I am. Not everyone has to do this or wants to do this, but I will not watch certain things in fiction or semi-fiction, real life, reality TV, whatever. I'm just not interested because I want to be present for that in my real work, which is where my energy is very much needed for my patients. So in other words, I don't need to be seeing it in my so-called entertainment. So there's certain scenes I haven't seen, which is why there are maybe potentially omissions in things I've said. And I wanted to correct what I said in part 2 about the consent aspect, which we're going to touch on more deeply here, but the consent aspect of the relationship between Darien and Donny, there, as Mark astutely reminded me when we were in conversation prior, there is no consent where there's grooming. That's you've kind of, that's moot now. That's void, because once you're in that realm of power differential, exploitation, really controlling the other, and brainwashing, all the things Mark and I have already said, then no, we're not in an equal, balanced relationship anymore. You can't really speak about consent, even though we're dealing with two adults. I
mean, legally, it's something that could be challenged.
Definitely.
But morally and ethically, once you start to mess with somebody's head.
Exactly.
It's not, they can't consent because you've taken away their capacity to some degree. To some degree, exactly. And of course, with this storyline, drugs are involved, and if somebody's intoxicated, morally and legally, they can't give consent.
And this was another point that I think I missed in retrospect, which because I didn't see certain scenes or how exactly they evolved, my sense was, without seeing those scenes, that Donny consented to get wasted and kind of do what you want with me. But I think regardless of that, even if that were the case, the issue of grooming kind of cancels out, even if he said, yeah, okay, kind of thing. But in fact, Mark advised me and told me that, he said no at one point. And in fairness, Darien stopped. But the harm is already done in a way. Yeah. The harm is already done, right? There was just one other thing I wanted to say to the point about the longing for approval that we see with Donny, and the fact that he puts Darien above his girlfriend at one point and goes to see him because that's the pattern that's been established. There's a parental aspect to that. And one of the reasons why abusers, whether it be consciously or unconsciously, can be so powerful, and one of the reasons why I would argue that, when people say, why didn't she just leave, when it's a woman who's being beaten by her partner or whatever, why didn't she just leave? Well, one of the reasons is because, as we said, we suspect as therapists this young man, Donny, probably was abused when he's got all the hallmarks of someone who was abused when he was little. And so, as I said in part 2, the blueprint is already there. And also, if it was someone close to him, it doesn't really have to be a parent or a caregiver, but if it was, it's doubly powerful. And so when he encounters a similar kind of pattern of abuse with Darien, it's not just the first time. It's evoking something that's very primal, that may remind him of someone who was, when he was a child and completely powerless and voiceless, really, overpowered him with no agency, with no chance, and it kind of sparks and revives that. And so even though he's an adult walking and talking, inside he may be like 2 years old, because there's a regression that naturally happens when you've got the push pull, you've got so many of the markers. And then there's one scene that Mark explained to me where Darien kind of comforted him, and and again, these things evoke our experiences of being children, of being bundled up in a blanket or a beach towel or whatever, and that's powerful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why relationships are so beautiful in the positive sense. When you are close to someone and you love someone, your partner, your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, it's a loving relationship. So much of what we enjoy of that closeness and the intimacy comes from when we were little. That the first time we encountered being bundled up in a blanket or by a bonfire with our mums or dads or uncle who was loving and kind, that feeling, which hormone is it, darling? Oxytocin, and dopamine probably, but oxytocin definitely. Those things that's powerful. If you can do that to someone and then slap them about and then revert back to hugging and kissing and being tender, that's going to mess with someone's head, right? So yeah, I just wanted to say that because, again, it's a red flag, but it's also the reason why abusers can be so competent at their evil, because we are hardwired for that. And even the worst childhood usually has some aspects of love and tenderness, even in the abuse and the hardship, right? So anyway, I wanted to speak to that.
And just that makes me think as well that and this is a bit of an advert for psychotherapy here, really, is that the character of Donny is one that works out everything, his confusion, his emotions, by doing stuff.
Yes.
He doesn't talk about anything.
Yes.
He talks about, obviously he has, obviously writing the play and then the series, must have been amazingly helpful for him. But in this, he's not talked to anyone about anything. And he just acts everything out. So if he's confused about his sexuality, he just sort of tries it out. He dates people to see what happens.
Yeah.
And puts himself through trauma. So he's the kind of person, kind of character that he'll put his hand in the fire and burn himself.
Yeah.
And then he'll put his hand back in the fire again to see if it happens the second time.
Yeah, I spoke to this in the part 2 of the video, actually.
Okay.
So interesting, you're picking up on all the same things, darling. I think you're absolutely right. And I love the way you've captured that, because, yeah, that's not really an obvious thing, but it's so important. And it's actually a facet of psychotherapy. You're absolutely right. And if you're interested in this, guys, I'm sure very few of you will be wanting to kind of read up on what is kind of our world. But the guy who comes to mind on this front is Peter Fonagy. And he was seen as a kind of god when I did my training, because although he never trained me directly, he trained some of my training analysts, and his influence was very, very palpable within my university, within my training, and because his work is so kind of profound and seminal and has changed everything, really, particularly in the UK, but also in other countries, but particularly the world of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in the UK, which ultimately generally bleeds out to other places. But that's that whole idea of doing rather than thinking, of doing rather than feeling and expressing. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Absolute recipe for disaster. That's gonna ruin your life if that's all. And unfortunately, a lot of people live like that, I would say. So,
yeah. And just something else that's coming to mind is, so Donny frequently with Martha and with Darien puts himself in dangerous situations and keeps himself in dangerous situations, and that's something I sometimes talk about, called self-abandonment.
Yes.
But I think it's really important not to use that as an excuse to victim blame, because you think, well, why did he do that? Why did he do this? The only person that's responsible for or guilty for a rape is a rapist. The victim can do all kinds of crazy things and put themselves in dangerous positions and stuff like that, and that's what some of us do. We're driven by internal forces. It doesn't mean that's a good idea. You know, I would say to everyone, don't put yourself in risky situations. But if somebody keeps putting themselves in a risky situation, that doesn't mean that they're not a victim and that they haven't been abused. It doesn't mean the same as consent.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean they deserve what happened to them either. It's just really unfortunate. And I think that speaks again to that point about doing rather than thinking, acting out, in other words, rather than seeking support or telling someone. And again, these things can be really hard to do, but that's the pitfall, really, that then you open yourself up to a lot of danger and harm and maybe even your own demise, you know?
Yeah.
So I wanted to move on, Markie, to the whole issue of the sexual encounters with drugs. And the thing that I wanted to speak to was, because we've touched on the issue of the fact that consent goes out the window because of all the things we've touched on, the power differential, the fact that Donny was being exploited and he was kind of very desperate and wasn't an equally balanced relationship. But the thing that I was thinking about, again, in preparing this content, was something that I learned during my training from a colleague. And I just want to briefly touch on that. And it's the whole issue. I know I'm not gay, so I'm not trying to appropriate something here, but this is just all my understanding. And if I've got something wrong, if anyone in the community is from the gay community and wants to kind of chime in the comments, please do. Okay, I always want to add that caveat. I say this respectfully, but the chemsex issue, and that is a whole kind of world within gay culture. And one of the things that I learned from a colleague who had worked deeply in those settings where generally men would present themselves for recovery and healing, my colleague shared with me some really interesting and deep insights. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight was how, so now I'm more speaking to Darien's personality, or the portrayal of Darien on our screen, which is that in order to do that kind of thing where you are really blurring the lines, like, again, I'm being very diplomatic and generous here, blurring the lines in terms of consent and harm and all sorts of things. And I don't know, in Darien's mind, does he realise that he's been, a perpetrator effectively? He's been a predator. Does he know that?
Yeah.
I doubt it. I think in his own head, he'll do some mental gymnastics that would make it okay. And probably just by sheer fact that Donny is an adult, he would say, well, no, he had the choice to walk away. Well, no, he didn't actually, because you made it such that he was dependent on you, and he was expecting and hoping and praying that you would help him in his career that means so much to him. And when he hasn't got a sense of identity, you then have an inordinate amount of power, so he might tell himself that I didn't do anything really wrong. I don't know. Of course, this is just conjecture. This is just fantasy on my part. But the thing that I took away from what my colleague explained about the whole chemsex culture in gay culture is that a lot of it is about reversing a previous abuse narrative so in other words, if I was to play devil's advocate, I might hypothesize that Darien had once been on the receiving end of some nasty abusive stuff, right? So him doing that to Donny, in his head, in a kind of twisted way that kind of makes sense, because everything we do as human beings kind of makes sense, even if it's twisted and messed up. In his head, he's reversed that now. Again, this is fantasy. I don't know about the real person. I'm speaking to the portrayal of the character on our screens, okay? Not the real person, to be clear. But I just think that's such an important thing to keep in mind, that abuser was once potentially someone who was abused, and in doing those cruel and questionable and harmful things to Donny, in his mind, probably unconsciously, he's reversed that pattern. And now I have the power. Where I was powerless, I now have power. So it's a kind of weird way of trying to heal that wound in himself. But obviously then he's perpetuating the harm by harming another person. And this is how we get into multi-generational trauma.
Again, it's acting things out rather than working through them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that I see so often. And in fact, it comes up in my work a lot when I work with my patients. And sometimes there's this sense of dismay. Usually when someone comes to therapy, there's a sense like in their family, they have an idea about someone else who would benefit from therapy. You know, this is something very common, a common phenomena, that someone will say, oh, I wish my mum, or I wish my sister, or I wish my brother would, you know. But that's the thing. They haven't got capacity. What Mark just said about, you know, instead of, you know, Darien is acting something out, probably from his own life, from his own past, from his own trauma, instead of going to see a therapist, talking to a priest, anyone, and thinking about things. He's just doing it. Then it's like discharging something, right? Literally and metaphorically, maybe, to be a bit gross. But the point is, that doesn't heal anything, but it gives him a temporary sense of empowerment in those moments where he's taken over another person effectively. So that's what I wanted to say, really, because I think is a really powerful insight. I suppose I should add, I don't know how this is ever going to pass with YT, but some of you will already know this, but when these chemsex parties happen, they're watching material that is the worst kind of stuff you could ever imagine in terms of, what did we come up? Peaches and cream. Do you remember my series Peaches and Cream, guys? If I say the P word, it will alert the algorithm and you may not see this video. So let's just call it Peaches and Cream. We know in Peaches and Cream, there's a website that's very popular, ends in hub, right? That's what we're talking about. But there's lots of genres, and we know that there are genres where we're no longer dealing with adults, we're dealing with minors, right? So when those parties happen, the chemsex parties happen, what I forgot to mention is that is what is streaming. Sometimes it's live streams. Are you following me?
Yeah, I just think we need to be careful though, because this is in some kind of communities that I think a lot of, you know, gay chemsex parties are probably perfectly
adult to adult.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a specific niche.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah,
it's a niche.
And the thing about the victim of abuse that's been disempowered, that abuses others, that's not specific to the gay community either, is it? That's
not at all. No,
general thing.
Not at all. But I guess because I'm thinking about Darien, and I think Darien is gay.
He describes himself as pansexual.
Pansexual, that's right. That's quite right, actually. Well remembered, Markie. Technically, he's not gay, he's pansexual. It's less about being specific about, oh, this is about the gay community. Right? I'm not making any kind of statement like that. Oh, and even that, yeah, this is just exclusive to, you know, the gay culture and everything. Not at all, to be clear. Thank you, Mark, for picking up on that. My point is much more about the fact that this is a way in which human beings attempt to make sense of previous harm done to them, is by reversing the pattern of offender victim. They've reversed it. So now I'm no longer the victim. I'm the one with the power. I'm the predator. Even if they don't think of themselves as the predator or the perpetrator, that's what they've effectively done. Within that, there's a pseudo sense of empowerment. So that's what I'm speaking to. Not that it has to be gay people, or this is bad, or I'm not making any judgments like that, but just that point, really.
There was another point I wanted to make, and that is Darien a narcissist?
I mean, a lot of you guys won't care about that. You just see him as a nasty piece of work, which I agree he is. A questionable piece of work anyway.
I think there's no doubt that he's a predator. And like you said, I think he might not know that.
I doubt he does.
But he's actually very Machiavellian in the way he goes about things. And I was just thinking about he covers his tracks really well, because if Donny did report to the police, he could probably make a really good defence of himself. Well, you came willingly, you wanted this, you stayed over, you came back, you chose to take the drug, I took the drugs with you.
Yeah.
He could be quite Teflon, I think.
Yeah.
So he's a canny customer. So by a narcissist, what I mean is somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, not somebody that does lots of selfies, puts lots of pictures of themselves on their social media. And narcissism is characterised by things like grandiosity, lack of empathy, and seeing other people as objects and pawns to be used. I think there's a very good chance that he is, actually. I think he's got a lot of, he's got some grandiosity, a lot of that kind of overconfidence. He's got the other thing with narcissists and psychopaths, they're both characterised by a kind of superficial charm. He does have a charm. Shallow, what they call shallow affect, which means shallow emotions. So often they can experience things like rage and anger, but mostly their emotions are quite shallow, which can also be a reason why they can be quite hedonistic. So somebody who's psychopathic stroke narcissistic, and they're very similar, they're different, but they have a lot of similarities, often in lots of thrill seeking. So in the same way that somebody with ADHD can kind of go for thrill seeking, so can people with narcissism, psychopathy, because they just don't feel much. So they're not going to get much excitement from watching Coronation Street, but they will get a lot of excitement from sexually abusing somebody and from drugs. So I thought it was an interesting point, whether he's a narcissist or not. I think he probably is. He ticks the boxes for a lot of the diagnostic criteria.
Yeah, I'm sure he does, actually.
And I suppose the other thing as well, in terms of, like, we talked a lot about victimology, is that Donny is attracted to predators into his life. Both very different, both got very different MOs, but he's attracted both of them, and he's by his own admission, he's poked the bear with both of them. So it is, I think there is this kind of low confidence and self-belief, which I think is what's going on, and this huge ambition, so his desire for approval. And that's, I think, the thing with a lot of comedians, a desire for approval. What can give you a better sense of approval than having a room full of people laughing? So that makes him very vulnerable to predators, and that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah.
And then in the episode where you watched certain bits, he actually, after what had happened with Darien, he actually put himself in risky situations in clubs and things like that.
Yeah, I think I saw a snippet of that. What, with other men and
he actually got raped again.
Oh,
but it was a little bit of a grey area because he didn't show the lead up to it. But the
Right.
implication was that he put himself in risky situations where he got raped again. So,
and that's like what your point about the fire, putting my hand in the fire and then putting it back in to see what happens.
And it's not because he's stupid. It's nothing to do with his IQ. If from the outside looking in, you can think, well, he's an idiot. Why would he do that? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's his own fault. It's not, because it's his psychology that has made him vulnerable to that. I said it before. I can't say this enough. Really, the only person responsible for a rape is the rapist. The victim is, no matter what the victim does, they're not to blame.
Absolutely. And it's really, it kind of brings us to the point about the role of psychotherapy, particularly, and in, I think, episode 1 of this 3-part series that I've made for you guys, I touched on the differences between psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and all of the different professions. We're all slightly different. So I'm now speaking about myself and Mark and our profession of psychotherapy, our place within the potential, really, that we can support someone like Donny, or the character, the personality of Donny, in reaching for something more sustainable, more health and life promoting than just repeating the patterns that he's been repeating that keep leading him into these harmful situations. I mean, obviously it depends on if the person is willing, because sometimes human beings want the pain more than they want the healing and recovery. And if that be the case, then there's no therapist on earth can help a person who, on some level, has already chosen the pain and the thrill and the ups and downs. You have to be ready, right? But the point is, I think that's where we could come into someone's life because the individual, he can't see what he's doing. That's the thing. He can't see it. He can't change it. He acts out instead of thinks, and he acts out instead of feels. And all of these things he might have the opportunity to learn how to do, i.e. to think about things, to think about his feelings and to feel them without necessarily acting them out. Because if you think about it, that's what children do. If you ever seen a little like 1-year-old, 2-year-old at the beach or something, or playing with plasticine, they'll put it in their mouth and they'll taste it. Unless mum says, no, don't do that. Because it's like, well, I want to see what's going to happen. I don't know anything else. I have to taste it. How will I know what it is if I don't taste it? Even if it's dog poo, you know? So, you know, in many ways, some adult human beings have never progressed beyond that. And that's where psychotherapy can be so powerful in helping the individual to learn how to think about their feelings and think about their thoughts, rather than just, no, I feel like jumping off a cliff. All right, let me jump off a cliff. Right?
Yeah.
And so we can help with that. This is kind of in a nutshell what psychotherapy is. I mean, psychotherapy is about a whole load of things, but if you've followed the series, I know some of you have followed it and had lots of aha moments watching Baby Reindeer. And if that has led you to a place where you think, I would like to seek support for myself, or I would like to, you know, encourage my partner or my loved one to seek support, what should I do? Where should I go? Well, that's what we do, and we do it really well. So we're Attract, okay? So that's the handle on the screen, and there'll be the links below. If you want to reach out to us, you can.
And another, just a final thought that's just jumped up is, let's talk about Richard Gadd now, because this is kind of more about him. If the way that he tells a story is accurate, he went through all these experiences without talking to anyone. He kept it a secret from. He did tell Terry some things, but he was more for keeping things to himself than disclosing. And yet, by producing this series, which shows him really warts and all, you know, it's he's really presented himself as. You know, he's put himself. It's interesting because he's kind of very likable, I think, as a character, and you do empathise with him. But actually, to cut a long story short, he's really aired his dirty laundry in making this. It's interesting. He's gone from not sharing at all, from under disclosing to over disclosing, which is interesting. And over disclosure is something that's common to trauma victims,
very much so,
and also neurodiversity. People can they just can't pitch it right, whereas people that have had that have got strong mental health from a good upbringing tend not to over or under disclose. They tend to, everyone gets a little bit one side or the other of the line once in a while, but they don't massively over disclose, and they don't kind of clam up and hold things completely to themselves. But he's gone from one extreme to the other.
Really good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, again, is kind of like, therapy. This might have been very cathartic and very helpful for you in making sense of what's going on, but in doing so, you've exposed yourself in a way that's going to make you even more vulnerable, because now everybody knows everything about you, too much about you. The whole world knows about your stuff and your issues. Whereas, rather than, putting this on the stage and then on the screen, maybe if you saw a therapist, you might have done yourself some favours. Yeah. But I guess it's a loss to everyone else.
Yes.
And the best art comes often from dark places. So he's given a gift to everyone else.
Absolutely.
But at what cost to himself?
Yeah, very good point, Markie. Very good point. Yeah, and I mean, again, that's another massive red flag, if you will, or just a marker of trauma. And someone who's been, again, this is all my fantasy. I don't know. I'm not saying it as a fact. Let's just be clear. But that would, again, be a massive red flag marker that this is a person who's been hugely abused in their life, even way beyond Darien entering his life, way beyond all of that, because that's one of the things that you won't have learnt if you grew up in a family where that kind of abuse could happen. It means that a lot of things were already broken. It means that you don't have the capacity for coherent narrative and judgment and discernment around your coherent narrative. Instead, you've got what Markie described so beautifully just there, which is it's a big vomit of everything. Now you know everything. Literally from the bottom of my gut, you can see the crud that was in my bowel, my small intestine. You've got all of it, or you got nothing. like Mark said,
Yeah.
you know. So when the process of recovery, what it often looks like in terms of evolution of that individual is that by the end of it, and it might take 10 years. I come from the tradition of psychoanalysis where we can see a patient for 20, 30 years, right? So that's insane to most people. Like, well, how would I do that? And that's crazy. Most of you listening won't understand that. But to my mind, and understanding to the extent I can, the human psyche makes perfect sense. You know, if you think about how long it takes for us to develop as human beings, and when by the time we've reached adulthood with all our baggage, with all our crap, you know, that's a long time we've had chance to build up a load of bullshit in our minds and in our psyches, right? So why would it not take another 5, 10, maybe 20 years to recover?
Yeah.
But by the end of that, the individual, the end of successful therapy, one of the markers of successful therapy and somebody who's more healed, I'm not saying they're a perfect saint that just goes, oh, they rise up from the ashes. It's not like that. We're still human. We're still imperfect. We can tell our story in a way that is moderate, that isn't, I've spoken on this about on another video. I'm going to link that below. Have a look at your screen so you know what the thumbnail looks like. In terms of, what's his name? One of the Spencers. So Diana's brother, he recently...
Charles.
Charles.
Is it Charles?
I think, is it... I forgot.
Earl Spencer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He spoke about, he's written a book about his experiences in childhood of being abused, and he had this interview, which I spoke about in that video. Again, it's on the screen, so you know where to look for if this is of interest. And one of the things that I thought was so powerful and was so hopeful to see, for me as a therapist to see, is that his discourse on what happened to him was very much indicative of someone who has pretty much recovered. So it wasn't all over the place. It was a coherent narrative. It also wasn't minimizing. He wasn't saying, it was nothing, you know.
It takes a long time for people to get to that place.
A long time, really. And most people don't ever get there because they don't give themselves a chance, or they can't afford the therapy, which is sad, but true, right? So that's the thing, and that's what Donny unfortunately hasn't found yet, and we can only wish him well, can't we, and hope that he does find it. It doesn't have to be us, but you know, we are the best. Well, obviously I would say that we've got an amazing team. We're a really strong team, and I think I'm so proud of us, really, because you know, you don't get to be good at this stuff without going through a lot, not just your training, right? So I think we have got a lot to offer, and our work spans way beyond retroactive jealousy, which is what we're probably famous for with retract.com. We've actually, all of us have deep insights, special interests, or even specialisms in areas that cover all of what we've talked about today, which hopefully has come through in what we said. So
definitely.
Yeah. So my dears, thank you so much. You are real ones for staying with us right to the end. We really appreciate you. Do remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'm going to leave the comments open. Say a little prayer that this sees the light of day. I talked about some very, high trigger
not things that YouTube likes to show people
generally, but
which is crazy because they look for trigger words thinking that somebody's like well, I don't want to say the trigger words, but they think that means it's all about encouraging the bad thing, not about the solution to the bad thing. It's insane. There's no logic.
No, there's no logic. Well, I found a workaround, but I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want to jinx it, but I have found a workaround in terms of helping the algorithm and YouTube see that we are qualified clinicians talking about this stuff. We're not just doing it for shits and giggles, right?
Yeah.
So we're doing it in service of humanity, in service of the fact that we know very well that a lot of people cannot afford therapy. So by watching this kind of content, you've already learned a lot of stuff that will guide you. I've mentioned the likes of Peter Fonagy. These people have written books that can guide you, can help you if you can't actually afford to pay for therapy, right? That's why we make this stuff. We make this free content for you and make it widely available. So this will be on Mark's channel as well. And thank you so much, guys, for being with us. Thank you, Markie.
No, pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to have this incredible man beside me on my own journey as a colleague as well, a fellow therapist, but also for your insight, Mark, and for the things that I missed, for correcting, some of the things like the issue of grooming. I'm so grateful to you for allowing me the space to correct that for our listeners and our viewers, because I did not mean to be anything like victim blaming. And it's interesting, even though I missed some of those scenes, my sense still was that this was a very exploitative relationship ultimately. So anyway, I'm glad we could clear that up. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.
Ka kite. Kia ora.
Kia ora.